Please welcome to the stage Caroline Wren and Mike Wiegand.
Where do you want me to be? You want to be there?
Maybe stand there.
You gotta stand on the spot.
Hi everyone. Hi. Are you tired? Are you still energized? We'll try to bring it to keep you awake.
We're just a little on the way of the happy hour, right? So gotta keep it going for 40 more minutes.
Well, thank you so much for joining this session where we'll kind of share our POV on the next generation CMS approach for modern companies, which I'm sure a lot of you are really interested in, whether you're agencies or kind of part of marketing in-house teams. My name is Caroline Wren. I own product marketing for really our core platform that includes the CMS and localization. You might have heard me talk about Analyze earlier, but CMS is one of my favorites to talk about. Essentially what we do in product marketing is we just launch cool stuff, and we also help make sure that what we're building is really solving for your most critical business needs. Joining me today is one of my favorite people that I get to work with at Webflow. Mike, do you want to give a quick intro of yourself?
That's awfully nice. Yeah, I'm Mike. Great to meet everyone. I actually feel like a bit of a pop star right now with this thing on. Ever since I watched Spice World as a kid, it's always been my dream to be on stage in London. So,
you really aged yourself with that reference.
Thank you. But I'm a senior solutions engineer. Basically, I'm the technical guy that works with Webflow's largest prospects when they're entering a deal cycle and evaluating Webflow. So really excited actually to speak today a lot about what we learn typically from these types of conversations when folks are migrating from their previous types of CMSs or platforms, and how that can really lend to the way that we're starting to develop our product at Webflow.
Awesome. So before we jump in, just a quick overview of what we're covering today. The CMS industry can be pretty dense and nuanced. It's been around for a long time, so we'll kind of give you a big picture of the industry context. Then Mike will walk you guys through a little bit of a history lesson on the different CMS approaches and how they evolved over time. What are the benefits and drawbacks of each, and really what are the strongest fit types of businesses that benefit from those approaches. Then we'll kind of transition into, again, our perspective on what the modern companies need in a CMS and how that informed what we're building at Webflow and our approach at Webflow. And the most fun part is, of course, talking through some hand-picked customer examples that we thought were really good at validating that approach and inspiring as well. Okay. So without further ado, zooming out for a second, we know that when it comes to building web experiences, there's a lot that goes into it, such as a wide spectrum of tools and tech that are all very important to your businesses. This is just a super high-level snapshot of that in the white boxes. But at the heart of it is your website. So this is your brand's most critical marketing asset, the front door to your business. You probably heard us, we're like a broken record. We say that all the time. It's because it's true. And at the heart of that is the CMS, or content management system. This is the hub of your entire digital footprint, typically, and therefore your CMS needs to be robust enough to not only manage the ever-growing volume of content, but also allow your teams to create web experiences that differentiate their brand and engage customers and actually drive business results like conversions. But the reality is we consistently see that teams are not satisfied with the web stack. Last year in our annual State of the Enterprise study, where we surveyed 500 scaling companies, we found that these businesses on average have almost 250 tools that they've implemented and manage on an ongoing basis. They spend over $500,000 per year on their web stack, and despite that, 93%, so almost all of the marketing leaders we surveyed still feel like it's missing the mark. So Mike, since you talk to various business leaders and end users every day about this very problem, can you help us unpack why, with all this money and all this investment and effort and man hours, companies still feel like their web stack is not meeting expectations?
Be happy to. So this is ultimately going to be a little bit of a recap and historical context setting in terms of where we've seen the market evolve through the history of CMS. Who thought that they would see a correlation between evolution and the history of CMS at conference today?
This is a college seminar. Get ready.
It's the last session of the day. Stick with me. We're all a little jet lagged, maybe at least some of us. So stick with us. We'll get you that happy hour shortly. But again, a little bit of historical context setting. Over the course of the next few slides that I'm going to be going through, we'll be speaking to ultimately the pros and cons of a lot of these approaches. There's been a lot of benefits from these different platforms and services that have come to market, but there's also a lot that we can really learn from them as well. And this isn't going to be, again, a chicken before the egg type of scenario. One of these did become for the others, and it's helped us really learn to how we can evolve Webflow's product and really understand the great opportunity that Webflow has in approaching the next generation of CMS and platforms. So we're going to start off with traditional CMSs, open sources. And when I talk about traditional open source CMS, I do mean the WordPresses of the world. These are ultimately the types of platforms that really powered the rise of commercial web early on a few decades ago. They were the first on the scene, and they are typically open source. So that means that their code is usually publicly available. It's also publicly available to modify and also then to distribute. But typically, it's important to note that the platform itself is actually usually free. So digging into a little bit of the typical architecture of WordPress or a lot of these traditional CMSs, when you get one, it's basically like a website in a box. The nice little metaphor might be that you open up a box as a kid, and it's that type of toy where, yes, assembly is required. And that's important context in terms of who needs to do the assembling that we'll speak to in a few moments. But basically what you get in this box is you're going to pull out your CMS, you're going to pull out the supporting database for that, and you're also going to pull out the separated front end. It's important, again, to note that the CMS and the front end are separate. Those pieces do need to be assembled. But just like any frustrating toy that we had when we were kids, when assembly is required, the batteries don't come with that toy. And in this case, the hosting would be that place. So after you've built out and assembled your website, then you do need to find your own hosting, typically with these open source CMSs, to go and deploy them. But of course, lots of upsides. Being early movers, there's lots of benefits that we could draw from open source CMSs and the traditional folks that showed up first. Just like we mentioned, the platform is typically free. So it made ultimately the price point to build a website really accessible for a lot of folks initially when they were looking to build an easy-to-use website. They also offer extensive tools within their ecosystem, typically plugins and sometimes those types of integrations. And they're usually expansive. If you need any type of additional functionality in your site, there's almost always an open source plugin that's available within the ecosystem. Third benefit is that they can also support different levels of website and scale. So they're really great for mom and pop shops, but for companies that have lots of resources, they are able to build websites that can scale to ultimately what their needs are. And ultimately, if you just need to get the job done, then WordPress is always the type of site that you can choose. Now, it's also a very familiar website and brand within the marketplace. WordPress and a lot of these open source type CMSs, a lot of folks recognize them. It is true that nobody's ever been fired for choosing WordPress. That's absolutely true.
Someone might disagree. Someone got fired for choosing WordPress.
Okay, well, I'll accept it. I can be wrong. But it is a recognizable brand name. And that does help for hiring a lot of the times too. This being the incumbent, there's a lot of people out there that have quote unquote like WordPress skills, right? Who's ever put that on a resume? This guy didn't put his hand down. He didn't want to be known as...
No shame.
Dude, that's fine. Hopefully in the future, there'll be more people saying I got Webflow skills. All right. But we want to move on then to obviously then some of the drawbacks. What have we learned from these traditional CMSs? And this is going to be the part of each sort of slide when we're going through these three different platforms that I'll speak to in terms of just what I hear from customers every day. Again, I spend my day basically with CTOs and CMOs of the largest brands in the world that are looking to migrate their platform. And these are all the typical things that they're bringing up when they're looking to make that migration. And we're learning these things in the deep discovery that we're usually spending multiple sessions on with customers. Now, the first thing with traditional CMSs that we hear from a lot of folks is that there's just a lot of code bloat and generally performance issues. And on top of that, lots of security risks. Whew, that's quite a bit, but let's unpack it a bit. So firstly, when we mean plugins, and what we've talked about earlier is that they're all typically open source. They can be developed by a lot of different folks. That inherently creates some of those security risks a little bit because ultimately they're not always vetted. So most of the hacked websites on the internet typically come from this plugin or open source type of environment. But plugin specifically in the definition of it is also really key here as well, because typically a plugin just equates to another script that you have to add to your site. So we work really closely with all of our customers when we're going through a lot of these evaluations, thinking about, okay, you're on an open source CMS, let's run through all the different plugins that you have. Typically, I often find it's like upwards of even 70% of the entire functionality in their site is actually being powered through a plugin. So 70% of your site is actually functionality you need, but there's a huge trade-off in the performance and the actual user experience that you're delivering to your customers. The overhead costs. Sorry to be your dad for a quick second and saying that there's hidden costs in a lot of things in life, but we all know, I think as professionals at this point, that there's no such thing as a free lunch. So at the end of the day, there's no such thing as a free platform either. The cost of maintaining these types of platforms, whether it's the updating of the plugins or updating the actual platform itself, a lot of that work has to be done through technical resources, whether it's an agency that you're closely partnered with or an engineer. And those are not bad folks that you need to often have within your business or organization, but how you're using them just to keep the lights on is super, super expensive. It's also just outdated technology. So again, a lot of these open source traditional CMSs, they came on the scene 20, 30 years ago almost. They were solving problems that existed 20, 30 years ago. So what I just hear from a lot of customers, a lot of CMOs, even a lot of CTOs is just, we're using a technology that was built to solve like 2000s problems. We're well and far beyond that. The limited design and content types and customizability is also pretty limiting for a lot of teams, especially for those folks who want to be really autonomous, the types of designers and marketers who really want to own their website. You can have very WYSIWYG, very visual types of experiences when you're in these types of platforms, but it takes a lot to set those up. And anytime that you want to adjust the design or create something new or novel or original outside of the theme that you already have, that's a lot of development work as well. And the last piece, we already talked about it, you got to go find your hosting. So you want to power this website that you actually built, you still got to go get the hosting, and that's honestly where a lot of those extra additional hidden costs are going to come out as well too. So really quick, who's using a traditional CMS usually? It's typically those small to mid-sized type businesses. It's a lot of those folks who are literally just trying to create lots of content really fast, and they're very content-focused types of businesses. The blog is very, very prevalent and very, very common. And it's brands that ultimately have a simple digital presence as well, too. We spoke to it a little bit earlier there a second ago that it's literally the type of website that just needs to get the job done. So, we thought that we had to have this thing, thus we do have such website, but they're not actually getting a lot of value out of it. And then it's the marketing-centric companies that ultimately do have fewer development resources or typically relying on these. Again, it's a very accessible platform for a lot of folks. It's hard to change your operating model with a WordPress website, but it is something that's going to ultimately get the job done. So
it sounds like these traditional CMSs, while they're tried and true, they come with a lot of hidden costs and design limitations, security risks, right? These drawbacks are non-trivial. In turn, how did the market respond to them? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, another great question. And the answer to that was the DXP. Who's ever used a DXP? Just a few? Couple? Okay. So ultimately what we mean by a digital experience platform, it's ultimately that full suite offering type of approach to your platform and building out your website. It's essentially something like this. It looks like the type of platform that's going to give you every single feature and functionality that you ultimately need within your marketing stack. G2 probably talks to it as like it's going to serve every single one of your omni-channel needs, but all from basically one platform or one place or one login. So what have we learned in terms of, honestly, those benefits that did come from DXPs? The first thing is that it's just fewer tools to manage. A lot of companies really focus on how can we consolidate our technology, whether it's for cost, how we have to manage, whether it's the number of places we need to deploy, but there can be a lot of benefits too in terms of the types of workflows and cycles that need to exist across the different features that we have in the platform. DXPs also offer a vast feature set. So literally everything you need, you can essentially go to that one vendor to ultimately get it. And it also offers tight platform integration. So all of these things designed by the same company, they're supposed to talk to each other relatively well, relatively consistently. And it makes those types of workflows that you might need to manage for teams and different roles across the different platforms ultimately tied together pretty well too. Now, the fourth piece here is the less procurement. So how many of us have, in a sales cycle or been part of some type of procurement process, got around that procurement process just by saying, oh, it's approved, it's already an approved vendor? A few of us have been there, probably, maybe. That's typically how these types of platforms can proliferate within these types of organizations really, really quickly, because ultimately they can just go back to that approved vendor to get the same type of feature or service. Now, what have we learned from the DXPs? They are expensive, and honestly, most of the time, these tools end up as shelfware a lot of the time. So with the rise of DXP, also typically came with the rise of bundling. Typically, you need to buy XY product to get Z, or you need to buy Z in terms of getting XY. You also have vendor lock-in typically as well too. So a lot of these tools within these types of platforms, they're only designed to really work with the product that exists from that same vendor or company. It's going to be pretty difficult in a lot of times to actually integrate the third party. It really kind of starts to pull out that approach of like breadth versus depth. They do offer every single feature that you might need, but in terms of how deep, in terms of quality in each feature set that you get, it might be a little bit lacking. Sometimes you seek and might be looking for the best in breed solution, but it's going to be a little bit hard to integrate. Now, the eng burden, also very, very heavy here. Ultimately, there just is that developer or engineering dependency when it does come to the heavy implementations that you have to work on. I used to work at a Canadian oil company. I stopped working there in 2021. When I was about to leave, they were about a year into their implementation of a DXP. I just had coffee with one of my mentors a week ago, and they're still implementing that DXP. Does that sound a little familiar to a few folks? This guy's like, oh no. Bad memories, huh? All right. Moving on then, ultimately the big piece too, and really this is where we can start to think about like what Webflow and what big point that we've learned is the different people. Like honestly, so far, a lot of these platforms have really served engineering or technical people pretty well, but marketing is the one that really lacks a lot of the flexibility and speed that they need. So being able to work outside of that predefined system that they ultimately are locked into without having to do any technical work, typically that doesn't allow them to get there. And then the last piece is that you have to pay for your data consumption. So the more you use it, the more you pay. And it can honestly be more hidden fees, and the complexity behind how they're calculating those, I don't like being in those meetings either. So who's using a DXP? It's brands with an extended website development timeline. There are also those folks who are typically more brand focused and have some type of digital unification is typically a goal. And there are also brands that are prioritizing risk management over actually accelerating their growth. And the last piece that we typically see are that they are for very large enterprise brands. They're the ones that can just basically throw resources essentially where they want to go, and they can double count for a lot of the software that they're paying for.
I actually do have a little bit of an anecdote as well with the very large enterprise brand. So the previous company that I worked for was actually using Adobe Experience Manager. That's an example of a very popular DXP that's been in the market for a long time. And it was actually a massive improvement from the solution they were on before, which was like light years legacy behind that. But what we were doing in our business unit, we were like trying to launch a new product every single month, and each one was like super nuanced. How we were selling it, how we were bundling it, packaging it. We wanted to do something really innovative on the creative side for each of them, which means every single one of these landing pages that had to be in 46 different countries, so multiple locales as well. We needed to be able to build that and customize that. And even though it was a really big enterprise company with like a decent budget, we still had limited developer resources. And they still, is that my earring?
Yeah, the power earrings are, there you go. They warned you
one
about
earring.
that.
So even a company with a really massive budget, like they still have limited developer resources many times that are supporting the website itself. Like they want to be working on more mission critical projects. So like the time it took for us to launch a landing page, we needed to give them 6 months lead time on these product launches. That was most of the time not feasible. So I've really felt this pain, like as somebody on the marketing side, getting tons of pressure from the head of my department, but like running into this like inertia just because of the platform that we're on. But
every time I sit through one of those discovery calls, just similar to like what you explained, and they confirm that the company's on a DXP, I don't even necessarily need to ask like how long is your deployment cycle for new content or designs. It's minimum 4 weeks. And like every single time I'm kind of like, oh yeah, like I feel so bad for you. Wait till we show you something better. Don't want to dish too hard, I guess, but that's, you know. So then the third piece here, ultimately thinking about like what was that third evolutionary moment, and it was the rapid deployment and ultimately the big response in headless. Now the headless philosophy was essentially a total 180 in terms of direction to DXP, where DXPs were trying to keep you entirely in the system. Headless is basically saying, no, we're going to strip the whole thing back to the most core critical functionality and then give you the ability to customize and pick and choose the best in breed technology that you want to use for all of that functionality. So where essentially the CMS is going to be the center of your marketing hub where you're authoring and creating your content. We want to ensure that you can choose whatever front-end tool that's going to be the additional spokes to your marketing hub. And it's via those powerful APIs that we can ultimately connect to whatever omni-channel front end that you need, any other type of custom front end, and ultimately any other tool that you need to include as well, whether it's chat, analytics, e-com, or CDP, so on and so forth. I wish we could count the number of times that we've heard headless in the past couple of years, but we'd be waste a lot of time in the next couple of minutes. Anywho, so jumping into the benefits of Headless CMS, they did provide a lot of benefits and a lot of things that we've learned from ultimately in terms of developing where Webflow is going to be going. And the first piece is that a lot of folks, especially developers, do need immense flexibility and control. They do need to trust that the system behind the whole thing and the infrastructure is something that they can truly trust in terms of being powerful and flexible enough for all the needs that they want to go and architect. There's also some benefits too that the system inherently provides safe, guardrailed environments for marketing. As a marketer, when you go to use Headless, your job's pretty defined. You jump in there, it's really straightforward. You can create content really, really fast, but it's essentially within pretty set guidelines as to where and how you're creating that content. Headless, of course, supports omni-channel experiences. It's pretty much one of the big reasons why it was ever thought up and why it's been continued to be developed. And number 4 is that it is, of course, just highly extensible and composable. So making sure that whoever you are as a developer and whatever your dreams are in terms of what you want to develop, it's totally possible. But with anything, there's a few drawbacks that we've also realized and that have come from this methodology as well too. Headless, as we just spoke to, while basically it does give you everything you want as a developer, it is very reliant on that engineering and development experience. And that can ultimately become pretty expensive for a lot of organizations, especially those who don't have all the resources that they can afford to throw around. Headless also leads to extremely long implementation timelines, lots of ongoing support, and lots of complex middleware and maintenance. It's really great that you can dream up essentially and develop anything that you want, but that takes a lot of planning, then it takes a lot of design, and then it takes a lot of development resources. And the amount of complex middleware and custom coding that needs to go between the front ends and the back ends, it becomes, well, just extremely complex and costly ultimately to build and maintain. The third piece then is the actual inaccessible and limited UX for marketing. I was actually just talking to somebody when I was out at the demo booth earlier, and they're making a migration from Headless. And it's what they said is the same thing that I hear from everybody. And it's one of my the first things that I typically ask about, like, how much did you have in terms of visual preview as a marketer, or how much control and flexibility did you have? And they were essentially like, none. We haven't been able to visual preview anything for the last 3 years. But overall, it is really just that marketing lacking flexibility and speed to create new content. Like, as marketers, you are always out there not only just devising and creating new content, but that comes from insights and things that you're learning. And then when you get that content out there, you want to learn from that so you can go back and iterate again. Well, that's also really, really tough. And it's also difficult if you're a little bit handcuffed and you're not even the one who can deploy that new content or design. You got to work through a developer or an engineer. Again, not a bad person. They are very valuable people, both parties in our organization. It's just inefficient. So, who are companies, really quick, that are using these headless experiences? They are companies that typically do have to have lots of engineering resources. Those folks are typically the ones who are actually owning and leading the website from the engineering side of things. Typically, though, we actually want to see those marketers as the ones who can have a lot more autonomy and ownership in that website. They just can't because of the technical limitations. And typically, I think every single customer that I've talked to who's operating a headless website has a very, very, very deep integration or relationship with a system integrator. It's not a bad thing, but if we could be using those system integrators to help us build new and additional content on a site, we can get a lot more value out of it rather than just trying to keep the lights on.
So how do people feel about these three solutions that Mike just covered? Just earlier in this session, we talked about our State of the Enterprise study. We also found that the majority of marketing teams feel restricted and unable to deliver on the outcomes they need, irrespective of whether they're using a DXP, headless, or traditional open source. What we're finding is these are just ultimately not solving the underlying problem. While they can be an elegant solution for certain companies, we are oftentimes encountering the antithesis of that. So just recapping Mike's history lesson on the evolution of the CMS industry that I know was super riveting. The rise of the business website, right? The rise of the commercial web, where every single business kind of needed to have a digital presence. This kind of WordPresses of the world like paved the way as traditional CMSes. And then came kind of this proliferation of tools, and DXPs really capitalized on this opportunity to consolidate all of these various tools into a single tech stack. When you hear monolithic DXPs, right, it's like vendor lock-in, but they give you a wide breadth. And then there's this explosion of devices like mobile apps, displays, AR, VR, whether you need omnichannel now or in the future, right? These headless CMSs provided you infinite amounts of flexibility for developers. Again, it's the same underlying problems. Like, the root problem really has not been solved. You're still relying on engineering in a disproportionate way. Engineers can be extremely valuable to website support, but I mean, we also have the ability to empower marketers. Marketing teams, again, just reiterating from before, like, they are ultimately responsible for the KPIs and the business outcomes that the website drives, whether that's SEO, brand awareness, sending leads to sales. But they are therefore not able to own the website experiences. They're bottlenecked by other teams and the infrastructure that their website is built on. And again, just back to my grievance with my previous company, really the hardest thing was not being able to deliver on realistic timelines that the business needed. So kind of what we're seeing in the market is this race to the middle, if you will. So starting with headless on the left, they're kind of stretching, as Mike mentioned, to try to be more visual, creating these visual editing and visual preview experiences that marketers theoretically would be able to self-serve, but still you need an engineer to create that preview experience. On the other side, DXPs and traditional open source tools are kind of stretching to try to be more flexible and composable, and actually also more visual. You'll kind of see DXPs kind of positioning themselves more as having a universal visual editor experience. Oftentimes, it's not kind of delivering what's promised. We at Webflow, right, like we are not stretching ourselves for the center. Like this is where we were built. This is where we originated as a visual development platform that's also composable, that also has APIs. So I think this is like tremendous market validation of the approach that we kind of took from our genesis. So kind of like fundamentally, we see the next gen CMS as a platform that needs to meet all the needs of all the teams bringing your website experiences to life. If you're a designer or marketer, right, you want to be empowered to create these bespoke experiences that drive results in a visual first way without over-reliance on engineers. The developers, of course, they might be supporting the website, but they also want to be able to free up their time to work on the really mission-critical projects that are keeping the lights on across the tech stack, that are really need their expertise. They want to still trust the platform. They want to make sure that they can effectively and scalably connect with their best-in-breed tools of choice. They want to be able to programmatically bring in data from various different sources into the website platform to be able to flexibly design with. They want to sync data in and out with various different tools. So when we talk about composability, that's really what we mean. So with Webflow, we kind of aim to intersect marketing speed and developer flexibility. So we fundamentally understand that we need to be both things, and we need to continue resolving all of these gaps and moving towards this kind of North Star, if you will. So first, visual first content management. This is where we are exceptional. This is kind of like our biggest market differentiator from the start. On our platform, marketing can self-serve implementation, building pages, spinning up sites, scalable design systems, SEO, localization. That's one that's very near and dear to my heart. Localization is a really, really tough thing to do. Typically, very, very engineering reliant. This is something that you can do in literally a matter of minutes if you wanted to, a matter of hours on Webflow. But that's not enough. We also have to be composable and have robust and powerful APIs. So we have like a full set of CMS APIs that are mock certified. Does anyone know what mock certification is in this room? No shame. Mike, do you want to explain it?
Sure. It's not a Mustang collectors group, I'll tell you that much. It's actually the organization that's internationally recognized for certifying and recognizing a company and their product as being headless. So basically through our APIs and the composable platform that we are building, Webflow is certified as mock compliant and headless.
Yeah. So not only are we visual first, we also have the APIs that allow developers that level of flexibility. And we continue to invest in that with API bulk operations, if anyone's been following what we've been releasing in the past 6 months. We also have our vetted Webflow app marketplace that we are heavily invested in. And many of you have probably attended sessions at this Webflow Conf with our vetted app partners. Again, this is not the same as open source plugins. They do not create the same vulnerabilities. And we have native integrations with Figma and React. So we're really optimizing for both visual first and composable. Now, for the fun part, customer stories. What we consistently see when companies move from these other CMS approaches in the industry to Webflow, they see game-changing results around speed. They're also able to ship higher quality experiences that more differentiate their brand. They're able to manifest their brand vision in a way that doesn't just look like some cookie-cutter template that any other company can replicate. And drive conversions, right? What is it all for if it's not actually like leading your business to more customers? Mike, do you want to actually talk about one of our biggest customers at Webflow?
Who's been to an Orange Theory?
Is it not big here?
A couple of people are like, nah, not for me. Okay, well, that's fair. But they are a international organization, obviously, that offers over 1,500 studios across 50 different states in the US, but more importantly, maybe in this context, 24 countries around the world. So they are one of the largest fitness franchises in the world, worth about over $1 billion at this point. Orange Theory did come to Webflow with a bit of a DXP problem. That's how they defined it. I'm just using their words. But what we really learned from Orange Theory and what we've been able to prove is ultimately just like how much faster teams can move. Firstly, we do have to give a quick shout out to the team at Outliant. They were the partner that worked with Orange Theory to create their migration over to Webflow. So from the time that the sales cycle ended to, I think it was just 3 months later is when they actually relaunched their website on Webflow. So big props, obviously, to Outliant and being able to service that type of deployment really, really quick. But there's been a lot of advancements for Orange Theory since they made the move to Webflow. They became that type of organization that wanted to be really focused in the content they're creating on their site just so that they could drive so much ROI through it. And the first thing is that they actually just dragged their site from being about 10 years behind into the modern era. Before they moved to Webflow, you couldn't even sign up through or for Orange Theory through their website. You literally had to submit a form and then somebody at an Orange Theory Fitness had to call you. Now, when you land on their site, it's localized in terms of what is the closest service or gym that's going to be available to you, and you're able to sign up essentially right on the page. So how's that for actual ROI that you're returning for your website and business just to start off? But beyond that, they've also seen over $4 million in total cost of ownership reductions and savings just from moving from one platform to another. And then where they've been able to actually, they didn't get rid of their engineering resources. They're just reallocating it and using it in the right, more productive ways within their business. They've also improved in 4x their project timelines for just about any content deployment, redesign, or any typical project timeline within their organization related to the website. It's increased by about 4x. And they've seen lots of other spin-off improvements as well, just in terms of SEO performance and actual page performance in their Lighthouse scores, far and above where they typically were rated before.
So go check out Orange Theory if you haven't already. I don't do it. I can't handle it. It's too hard, but people get great results. So these are just some other examples where we see Fivetran, Jasper, Smaller Earth. These are enterprise customers that have a lot in common in moving from a headless tool or moving from a traditional open source tool. They all saw dramatic increases in speed to market. Like, you can't make this stuff up. These are incredible stats that just stand alone. Fivetran is a cutting edge automated data movement company. They were able to create 130 plus web pages and ship them in a year's time. So much better than what they experienced before. Smaller Earth Group was one of our kind of early adopters of our native localization solution. They launched multiple locales in a fraction of the time that it took before on a headless, hard-coded setup. But like, my favorite anecdote for them is they actually like spun up a Spanish site in literally 3 hours. Just to test, essentially, if it was worth them expanding into that territory. So they actually like used Webflow localization to test out new markets in record time. Did you have anything to add here?
Smaller Earth's actually here, so if you can run into the folks, they're definitely great people to talk to. Really, really great interactive group, but like a few locales is a bit of an understatement. So you might want to go ask them exactly how many different locales are offering across their site. Quite a few. But I'll quickly then speak, of course, to Jasper as well. This is pretty much one of the most tried and true models when I'm speaking to customers about what the potential is that Webflow could provide you. It's pretty simple math. If you can create more content, then you can create better content. And the more you do that, the faster you'll learn. And because you're using a platform that's extremely autonomous and quick for designers and marketers and product teams, you can start to iterate on that content even faster. So as you get better content out to market, you should start to be able to position yourself with the right audience more effectively. And then ultimately, you can start to gain more insights and results. And a lot of the features that we're releasing relatively soon will improve that whole process as well. And ultimately, it's going to lead you to a place where you can retarget and really focus on that maybe upmarket movement or really scaling the presence of your digital brand.
And we'd also be remiss not to mention our recent Forrester study that found that Webflow is making a real impact to the bottom line of these businesses. And we're talking 332% ROI to be exact. They got to market faster. Again, we see this consistently across the board, and they did it all while saving costs, nearly $1 million a year. So, Mike, from your point of view, what do these companies like Orange Theory and Jasper and kind of the folks that we surveyed in this TEI report have in common?
Well, good question, and this is it. This is the last one, folks, promise. Ultimately, the types of teams that are using Webflow and what we're learning from them is, well, one, hopefully it's all of you, but it's ultimately teams that are brands that are heavily invested, obviously, in their website as ultimately a business driver. They really understand that their marketing website is their 24/7, 365 salesperson. It's always open, it's always available, and it truly is one of the biggest opportunities for ROI within your digital presence. They're also the companies that realize the speed that they need to get to market is a necessity. The faster you can deploy better content, the more you can learn, the better you're going to be able to retarget sooner. And it's using these best in breed technologies that also ensure that there's no vendor lock-in. Again, using Webflow means that you can integrate essentially anything that you're going to want to most oftentimes. And the last piece is that last couple of pieces are companies who prioritize cost efficiency. So we're not going to do away with developers and engineers, and we're not going to do away with a lot of the resources necessarily that we need in our organization, but we're not going to double count, and we're going to be able to deploy them in very productive and proactive ways within our business to move us forward, both from a core product perspective, but we're also going to free those marketers to create really great content faster. And it's also the folks who want to be future-proofed. I'm sure that we all really wish that we had a crystal ball that we could see a year or 2 or 3 years ahead what we actually are going to need in our website. But even examples like Smaller Earth, I'm sure they didn't necessarily recognize that they needed localization until maybe they actually realized they did. And it's working with Webflow that is a visual-first platform. It's going to give marketers and designers that autonomy to build whatever and design whatever they want, but it's also going to give those developers the composability and the flexibility and control that they need to ultimately go and execute on whatever the next generation of technology is that needs to be integrated as well. Okay, you're free.
You're free. Thank you so much. Find us if you have questions.